It is Monday, July 17th, and welcome to another edition of Your Voice, Your Future. I'm your moderator, Armstrong Williams. Adryann Glenn, who's founder and CEO at LLoyd Consulting Group, has a story to tell. Once having a promising career in life, he found himself immersed in a life of crime, ended up serving time in jail, coming out, reclaiming himself, finding himself, and making the American dream his. Oftentimes in today's America, we hear about the crime, the petty theft, the homicide, the incarceration, and we ask ourselves, what can we do to change this behavior and this direction that our country finds itself in? And when my producers and I were discussing tonight's broadcast, we said, why don't we find someone who's actually been in that life and tell us what we're not being told, to give us some kind of sense of what needs to change. So I welcome Mr. Glenn to our broadcast tonight. Adryann, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for the opportunity.
So where did you grow up?
I grew up in Herndon, Virginia, actually, Fairfax County.
Fairfax County. What did your parents do for a living?
I mean, they did what they could do. My dad had a whole lot of different jobs. The one job he probably kept the longest when I was a child, he was a bus driver. And then my mother was, she was like the checkout lady at Giant's Foods. You know what I mean? That's what she did. She worked at the grocery store.
What were the values in that household when you were growing up in terms of discipline, moral striving, right from wrong, work ethic, sacrifice? What was that environment like, Adryann?
Well, originally I'm from Western Pennsylvania, so the steel mills and all of that. So my mom and dad didn't play about much. My mom was heavy-handed when needed to be, but most importantly, my mother and father were just always about church. God. Regardless of what you're doing, keep Him first in your life. Stay focused on Him. No matter what else you get in life, as long as you keep God first, and the most important thing, you're gonna be all right in the long run. But they weren't strict, right? You got to know what's going on out in the world, but they definitely had a firm hand and guided me as best they could, given our socioeconomic conditions.
So what is it that your parents, as most parents, did not realize was going on with their son, Adryann? And what age did this all begin to develop?
Oh, well, growing up in those neighborhoods, right? There's always the element, it's always present. So it's not hidden from you. But probably about age 7, I started dabbling around with some of the older guys because they just saw me as this like kind of a nerdy kid who liked to read a whole lot. And I remember the first guy that ever approached me, that's the one thing he said to me. He said, regardless of what comes to you, whatever in life, remember that you're smart. You're not tough, you're smart. And that's why we're dealing with you. So about age 7, I started dabbling because I could run around the neighborhood as freely as I wanted to. We knew pretty much everybody. I guess my mom and dad figured if I was doing something wrong, somebody would tell them. But addiction is addiction, right? People make compromises they probably should not make, especially when it involves children that have access. So about age 7, I'm not going to say I was a sneaky kid or I was a devious kid, but my parents had to work. They had to work long hours. They were tired. I also have siblings. So there's only so much they could do to keep an eye on me. And I always had good grades, right? So in that kind of neighborhood growing up, if you're the kid got the good grades, nobody would ever suspect. It's like butter would melt in your mouth. So, about age 7. But age 11 is when I really started getting involved, started making a little bit of money, like real money.
Well, let me stop you, because this is an important story. What were you as a child doing at age 7 that many kids are doing today?
I mean, I was like an errand boy, right? They want a soda from around the corner. It starts like that. Go get me a soda from 7-Eleven or something. And then it just progresses to, hey, take this and over to him, and he gonna give it back to you, give you something else, and you bring that to me. And when you do that, they give you a little bit of change. At the time, we talking about 1986. So if you know the history of narcotics in America, that 86 to 93 a lot was going on. A lot of money was being made. So I get like $75 every time I ran one of them little bags. So obviously I would rather run one of them little bags than go get somebody a soda or a bag of Doritos and get like $2. And that's kind of what sucked me in, money.
Your parents did not see a change in your lifestyle from 7 to 11 and beyond, that you had a little money, you could do far more things, and you really didn't have a job? They didn't see this?
They didn't really notice till I was about 14, because I was kind of good at hiding it. Like, I would just do stupid kid stuff. Like, everybody in the hood, I make sure everybody go to the pizza shop with me, right? Or when the ice cream man come, we get a ridiculous amount of stuff from the ice cream man. Or I got real good at this thing, and I still do it today. My wife gets on me. I don't actually go into the store and purchase things myself. If I want something, I'll tell somebody what I want, give them the money, and have them go get it for me. But all of that comes from being a kid, having money, and I really shouldn't have had money. So it was just ways of hiding me having money. That's all. They don't see you spend it. They don't see you with it. How they know you got it? And that was it. So I was 14. When I was 14, I kind of didn't care anymore.
So when did the trouble start? When it really got serious and you began to jeopardize this thing we call freedom?
When I was 14. Oddly enough, when I was 14, situation that happened in the neighborhood, a gun had come up missing. And the police, for whatever reason, were directed towards me, thinking I would know where it was at. Again, to most people outside of what was going on in the neighborhood, I was just a kid who played sports and was real good, had really good grades, so all of the kids stuck around me. The children knew, and some of the other people that were into things knew what I was really into. And I guess the cops put that together. They came looking to me for the gun. I told them I didn't have it, but I'd get it for them. And they wanted me to bring it to them in my house. And I was like, nah, you find me in my house with it, you ain't gonna care what my mom say. I say, you gonna charge me with the gun. Let me give it to somewhere that's you. So I had convinced the cop to let me bring it to him at school. When I got to school that day, I got to talking to this girl I was really into, 14-year-old boy, right? And they bring me down to the principal's office so I could turn it in. But the cops had been searching the school since like 5 a.m. that morning. So I ended up with a ridiculous number of charges for having a concealed weapon, being underage with a weapon, a stolen weapon. And like that's when it started when I was 14 years old.
And it only escalated.
Yeah, because my definition of self changed. Right? You go back to to some people, you like the superhero, right? You got these charges, you didn't snitch. And people started treating me a little different. Now, deep down, I just wanted to keep my grades up and go to college. And that's really why I kept continuing to make money how I was. It was to have money to pay for school. My mother and father didn't have the credit to get me loans, to put me through college, or even for the basic necessities like your books and doing your laundry at school. So I knew I was going to need money if I wanted to go to college.
Your
so
brothers and sisters were not aware of your illegal activities and said nothing?
They knew what I was doing, but they wasn't going to say nothing because I was doing stuff for them, right? Like I'm the youngest of my siblings. So I was doing things for them. And I'm like, and they got a little bit of, I guess you could say a reputation for themselves. That's my little brother. So imagine if he like that, what I'm like, right? So, I guess it made their life a little easier. People picked on my brother a lot coming up. They didn't pick at me as much because I was pretty good at athletics and I had good grades, but they picked on him a lot. And once I started to kind of separate myself from the pack, he's my brother. So it afforded him a protection, a security, and I guess a bit of hood notoriety.
Let me stop you. Okay. You're 14 years old. We haven't gotten to how you ended up serving prison time. From what you shared with us at this point, Adryann, what can parents and young people learn today in their homes and their communities with people who are older that get them involved in illicit activities that lead to illegal activities that leads to sometimes not only jeopardizing their own lives, but their family lives? What can we as a society learn today, and especially kids who find themselves in that same situation, but with far more at stake than when you were coming along in the 80s?
What I would say is, simply put, there's no reason for a child and an adult to be that close. What is your interest in my child? Why are you always talking to my child? Pay attention to those kind of signs. If your child is like, I want to go outside and play, and it's super early on a morning when they should be sleeping in, pay attention to that. That don't make sense. Like your child will just start doing things that don't make sense. And then, like, don't be afraid to go outside and play with your children, right? We got a lot of people nowadays that want to get a kid a phone or a child, get to interact with them and their friends. You'll start to pick up on the way children treat them. You know, like when I was 7 years old, I wasn't hanging out with other 7-year-olds. I was hanging out with the kids that were 12, 13, 14, 16, 19. You know, my mother and father would have known that if they weren't at work all the time trying to take care of them, right? And I thank them for that. And it was wrong on me for using that against them. They didn't have the opportunity to do it, and they get to know people in the community. Those older people that are home all day and listen.
You know, this is so fascinating listening to our guests and the fact of the points that he's making about what happens when young people, kids, are 7 years old, hanging with adults. He made a very insightful point. Kids, why are kids hanging out with someone much older than? The parents don't see that as a red flag, that there's a sign that could be problematic in the long run. And the fact that he was able to involve himself in these illegal activities and was able to even co-opt his own brothers and sisters who were older than he was. Did they not realize how he was jeopardizing himself, and that career that he was in and the way he was making money was short-lived, and that it would eventually catch up with him? And the fact at 14 years old, he would be targeted by cops because they knew already that he knew exactly where that illegal weapon was. I mean, he talked about getting caught up in a relationship with a girl. I mean, this is a kid, this is a child. He had no idea what he was about to face. I know we're having audio issues, and I ask you to bear with us, and we're going to try to work ourselves through this, but it's so important for him to continue this narrative of what led to him going into jail, how long he was locked up, and how he was able to turn his life around. So let me just try to go back to Adryann. Adryann, could you continue about what happened that led you to be incarcerated? How long were you incarcerated? Did you become a man in jail, or did you become a man between the ages of 7 and 14 living on the streets?
Yeah, I was already a man, you know, by the time they put me away. I went away, I did a whole bunch of jail stints.
No. Tell us what put you away.
I think the first time I went away, it was an assault and battery, but they called it malicious wounding. That was the first time.
And how old were you? How old were you at the time?
The next time I went away, as an adult, I was 20 years old.
Okay.
20. I was in college at the time when that happened.
How much time did you spend in jail?
Total?
Yes.
In my whole life, probably about 8, 9 years.
What did it do for you mentally when you faced the realization that you were locked up, sacrificed your freedom, sort of tossed your life away? What is it that happened with you mentally where you were able to change? Was it in prison that you were able to get on track? What was that moment that made you realize you had to make a change?
Well, it was the last time I went away. The last time I went away, my father passed away 2 weeks before I had to turn myself in. And it just had me, time of reflection, like, is this going to be your whole life? This isn't what he raised you for. This is what he meant you for. Your mother's going to need you. Should these people ever let you back out of here? You got nieces and nephews. You still running around like you're 7, to 14. You're an adult now. So I just made a decision then and there that if I come home, if these people let me out of here again, I'm going to do something to better my community and better myself. And it was just in that moment. Like, I just didn't want it anymore. I was kind of happy to be going away. I didn't have to live up to these expectations that I had built in the communities that I lived in for people. Finally,
before we let you go and talk to Vince Ellison, what can other young people and families can learn from your life, particularly in what we're facing today in this country?
It's not worth it. If you cut a corner, you're going to miss something that you need, so it ain't worth cutting the corner. As much money as you might think you're making in the street, you got to turn it all back in. You can't really do anything with it. You're not really living life. I've probably been living life now for about the last 10 years since I've been home. Now I'm living a real life. I got children. I got a wife. And boring is good. Don't let all that excitement that people tell you going on is a good thing. It's not. You just want to be bored. Being boring is a good thing because life is really about small moments. I look back on my parents now that they both transitioned. What I remember about them wasn't shoes they bought me, but, you know, a joking contest we might have had, a meal my mother made. Even with my brother, he's still around, but I remember the good times, like the little fun things we had that didn't cost a dime. So what you're doing to get money or to get recognition out there in the street, it really doesn't matter in the long term. You know, give yourself a chance to grow up. Don't make a mistake at 17 that's still affecting your life when you're 57. Felonies are for life. Don't let nobody tell you do your time, you come home and it's over. That ain't true. You do time for the rest of your life once you're a felon. For the rest of your life, you'll be a felon, you'll be doing time. So it's just not worth it. You making a commitment to something that you don't even understand, and give yourself a chance to grow, live, and find out who you are. Because it takes a while. I didn't know who I was till I was 30 years old. Don't waste 30 years of your life trying to be somebody that people want you to be as opposed to who God created you to be. Find out what your purpose is and follow it.
Adryann, Glenn, thank you so much for sharing this very important story. It's very inspiring that you've lived firsthand, spending almost 8 years in jail. I think the advice and wisdom that you just shared about why these kids should think twice about their crime, about these drugs, about this petty theft, I just think, I don't know if anybody's ever said it better. Thank you so much for joining us on Your Voice, Your Future. I'm Armstrong Williams, and we'll be back. You know, I had an opportunity to interview Vince Ellis with his last book on C-SPAN, and I thought that was a blockbuster. But I got to tell you something. Crime, Inc. is a must-read. Let me welcome back author of 25 Lies and the Iron Triangle, and now Crime, Inc., my man, Vince Ellis, to the broadcast. Crime, Inc., my man, you're just telling it like it is. Let me read this for you because I gotta read what you say here because I want people to understand how Democrats, he says, employ mafia and gangster tactics to gain and hold power. Say your piece.
Well, Armstrong, you know, you look at school choice, for instance, and you understand that black people want it, black people need it, and the Democratic Party will not let them have it. And they use these mafia gangster tactics to keep them from getting it. The Democratic Party is the same party they've always been, just under new management. Look at the condition of black people. Still at the bottom of every socioeconomic condition in America. Crime, the murder rate, you name it, it's bad. How do they keep this power? They use it through, they get this power through intimidation. They get it through bribery. I mean, when you go down to the black community during election season, they bribe you, souls to the polls, use intimidation. If they want to get money, what do they use? Planned Parenthood, kill babies, make money off of that. They go into the black community, they use the teachers' unions for money laundering. The government pays the teachers pay the unions, and then the unions take the money and give it back to the Democratic Party. The Democratic Party got over $40 million last election cycle from the teachers' unions, and this money came from taxpayers through the teachers' unions to the party. It's just basic money laundering, man. They allow the crime to happen in the streets. And look, you and I both have been on the streets of big cities. You and I both know that these politicians probably take a cut of everything that come through these big cities. A lot of these politicians know exactly what's going on. They want to defund the police. They want to end bail. They want to have the criminals on the street selling dope to their constituents because they get a cut out of all of it. That's Crime Inc. That's the Democratic Party. They won't seal the border. Why? Because a lot of the people up there lobbying in D.C. represent the cartels. The cartels give the lawyers money. The lawyers give money to politicians, and it keeps going around and round and round. And Crime Inc. knocks the top off of all of it.
And it is no wonder why our kids are in these failing classrooms it is no wonder why you have 23 schools in Baltimore County and not one kid is proficient in math, English, and reading. It is no wonder these kids lack real self-esteem and real self-worth because they have no skills and they just pass them along as gold students because all they care about is that $15,000 and that $17,000 per pupil so they can continue their $500,000 salaries as superintendents. They can drive their Mercedes and BMW and Volkswagens or whatever it is, and these kids continue to suffer. They commit crime. They're involved in sexual trafficking. They're incarcerated, and it's not going to change because you believe it's intentional.
It's all intentional. It's a variation on a theme, Armstrong. We can look over our history. Over the past 220 years here in America, they've always had the same system. Democrat politicians on top, a group of house Negroes in the middle that control the black people down at the bottom. It's a variation on the theme. Like I said, they're the same party under new management. They've never stopped, and they have gotten their power off of the backs of black people. If they lose 10, 15% of the black vote, they're done. They know it. They stay in power by keeping black people beat down, poor, under their control, and they have to keep them uneducated because the most dangerous thing in America is an uneducated black person because you cannot control them. Frederick Douglass says that an education makes a man unfit to be a slave. So what do? You make sure you don't get an education. This is why they are against school choice. Now look, they're sending their children to private schools, won't they? Every last one of them. All the people in the Black Caucus, all of the white Democrat politicians, they will send their children to private schools. Jesse Jackson will do it. Barack Obama will do it. Hillary Clinton will do it. The Kennedys will do it. But when it comes down to just allowing black people to have that same choice, no. And because of this, they've run the father out of the house, and you know about how they did that by putting the man in house clause in welfare. They ran him out the house. Then they set him up on all these child support charges where he can't get a job, so he has to hustle for the rest of his life, and he can't become a member of society, so they castrated the black father. Then they took these children and put them in schools where there's no God. They took out God, but they allowed the rainbow flag, right? They took out God, but they allowed them to bring in sexual grooming, and they allowed them to bring in the drag queens. They did all of that. They allowed them to bring in porn. And now they're teaching these children that they're not a man, they're not a woman, that they can have their sex changed at 5, 6, 7 years old. They allow the parents to, the children come to school and they're transitioning them without their parents' permission. They are doing this to keep the black community demoralized, to keep it under control, to keep it confused, but keep that vote and keep that government money coming through so they can launder it through the unions and give it right back to Democrat politicians.
So what is the correlation, Vince Ellis and his new book, Crime Inc., between education level and crime rates? And do people with more education commit far less crimes?
Armstrong, if you can't read, you can't get a job. And if you can't work, you have to steal or you have to hustle. And that's the trap. You and I both know that. You and I both grew up in the South in the Jim Crow South. Our parents made sure we got an education. They understood how important it was. And because you and I got a good education, whether or not it's through the public school system or whether or not we just decided to educate ourselves, because we were able to read, we were able to enlighten ourselves and expand our horizons. Abraham Lincoln learned to read. Frederick Douglass learned to read. He said learning to read, it freed him up to understand and read books that told him he was not a slave. And this is why it was against the law. A white person could go to jail down south for teaching his slaves how to read. That's how dangerous education was. And now today, they're doing the same thing all over again. The Democrats win. They win through crime. Why? Because crime keeps you demoralized, keeps you frightened, keeps you afraid to move and better yourself. They win through keeping people uneducated. Why? Because if you can't read, you can't understand how great you can become. You can't learn a job skill. You have to stay exactly where you are. And that's under their control, begging for the crumbs that fall from the master's table because you can never, ever expand yourself. They know it. That's why they get their children great educations, and they make sure that their constituents never get it. This is an evil institution. And until we wake up and until the black men in America start understanding that it is their job to protect their families, to protect their communities, to make sure their children are educated, until they understand that they have to love their children more than they love the Democrat Party, until they understand that they can never, ever look me in the eye and call themselves a man.
Well, do you believe it's just the Democratic Party?
I think that the Republican Party says the schools in our districts are fine. Now, the Republicans have school choice as part of their plan, as part of their platform. Yeah, they got no problem with it. Every time it comes up, they will vote for it. The Democratic Party is the party that always blocks it. Always. The young lady from Georgia, inside Atlanta, who was at the State House in Georgia, the state representative, who just decided to become a Republican, says she left the party because the Democrats, the black Democrats mostly, fought against school choice. That they told her that black people didn't have enough sense to make decisions about education for their children. She said that they told her that they would give more money to the system, but they would not allow the children out of the system. Why? We just want to give them hope. She said, well, you telling them a lie. You're not going to give them anything. It's been getting worse over the past 50 years. The great Bob Woodson, a good friend of me and yours both, said that black people made more progress the 100 years after slavery than we've made in the past 50 years.
That's
Why?
scary, isn't it?
Y'all allow the Democrat Party to take over our community and put us back on the plantation.
You know, that is really a frightening stat. What are the mechanisms, Vince, by which education, I mean, clearly it's common sense, reduces crime?
Well, when you get educated, Armstrong, the first thing you can do is you can find work. And when you find work and you're working hard, you really don't have time to commit any crime. You're getting up in the morning time at 6 o'clock, getting prepared to go to work. You come home, you take care of your family, you eat dinner, you go to bed, and you do it all over again. Your mind is on a higher plane. You're reading your Bible. You're reading the newspaper. You're reading to your children at night. You're expanding your horizon. You're not out there having to depend on anybody to take care of you. You can find work. You can elevate yourself to gain money in a legal way as opposed to a illegal way. When a person is given an opportunity to work and make a legal income versus going out and committing crime, if he could make a choice, he'll always choose 99 times out of 100 to work a job, make an honest income. But when people cannot read, when they cannot write, when they cannot count, but they have to survive, they resort to crime. Crime is a necessity because of ignorance. Crime is a necessity because of miseducation. Crime is a necessity because the Democratic Party wants to keep black people under control. And they keep them under control through terror. They keep them under control by keeping them locked in their houses. They keep them under control by making them afraid to go out into the world. You cannot have freedom without courage. And you cannot have courage unless you have Jesus Christ. And you cannot have Jesus Christ unless you are allowed to pray, read your Bible, and go out and go to church and fellowship with other people and elevate yourself. The Democratic Party hates all of that, and they'll do everything they can to stop it.
Finally, how can people go out and get a copy of your book, Crime Inc.?
Crime Inc. will be available in October. You can get you can pre-order it right now. Just go on Amazon, look up Crime Inc., look up Vince Everett Ellison. All my books will come up. Iron Triangle, 25 Lies, and now Crime Inc. Believe me, read it. It will rock your world. It'll show you how the Democratic Party is not just using black Americans, but all Americans as a resource to spread their nefarious, evil ideology of tolerance, of atheism, of transgenderism all over the world, and how they only have one goal: destruction. Look at the black community. Look at Philadelphia, Detroit, Memphis, LA. They destroy everything they touch, and they're proud of it. They walk around with their chest stuck out, strutting, asking to be reelected. They are the same party under new management, the same party that supported slavery, the Confederacy, and 100 years of Jim Crow, where they killed, raped, stole elections. They're doing the same thing now that they did then. Castrating little boys, call them little girls. Giving domestic little girls, call them little boys. Destroying the black community. Letting dope and fentanyl coming over the border. Sex trafficking. The same thing they've always done. kill, rape, and mutilate. They've never stopped it. Same party. People, wake up and send this party to the ash heap of history they belong.
Vince Ellis, it's always a pleasure having you on. Your voice, your future, always wish you well. It's good to having you back. It's been too long. I would look forward to having you back in the near future. Tiffany LLoyd is up next on Your Voice, Your Future Town Hall. I'm Armstrong Williams, and we'll be back. Tiffany LLoyd, the Food and Drug Administration approved the first ever over-the-counter birth control pill in the United States of America. How significant is that approval?
I think the approval is very significant. You have a lot of people who don't have access to insurance, and I think that we see the teen pregnancy rate that is steadily increasing, and I think that this right here would help lower the teen pregnancy rate. So I think it's very significant, especially for people who don't have access to health care.
So abortion is the new contraceptive for young girls. I mean, do you think they really get what happens afterwards when they have this baby aborted, that it's not going to have emotional and mental consequences? We're just making it available to everybody. I understand what you're saying, but as we say that, should we also discuss the consequences if they're not properly talked to and walked through exactly what they're doing? It just doesn't stop there when the baby's aborted?
Absolutely. I absolutely agree with that. I think that education is the key when it comes to our young girls being pregnant. You know, let's be clear. You do have young females, particularly in high school, who thinks that it is cool to get pregnant. I mean, my God, you even saw Lifetime Television have a movie based on a true story called The Pregnancy Pact. So I think that education is important, and I think that sometimes parents don't want to have these uncomfortable conversations. And I do think that education, it starts at home, but it also should be implemented more in schools.
You know, I'll tell you something. You're a political scientist. I read something this past week that I had to process. The Washington Post on Thursday had a big expose on President Donald Trump and his finances. He went in and revised his tax returns. And some of the returns where he said he made $25 million on his golf course, he revised it to $150 million. And in some places where he said he was making $5,000 and whatever $1,000 he was making per speech, he revised it to show that he's being paid by Reverend Moon's wife, sometimes $2.5 million a speech. And the Washington Post made it clear there is nothing illegal and ethical about it. You can do that. But here's the point. In his revising his taxes, he showed in the last year he has been paid and made over $1.2 billion. And you would think, this is what some people were thinking, with all the lawsuits and everything that has gone on with him, what it tells you is there's an industry out there that really appreciates and wants his brand, and he is still killing it.
Yeah, he is. You know, as many people that feel that Donald Trump, President Trump, is hated by many, he is loved by many as well. And I mean, you cannot take that away from him. He is business savvy. So it seems as if just from what I see, the more he is being attacked, the more that his businesses are thriving. It seems like he's starting to have more support. This is a man who has been indicted in New York and Georgia, and now he is still the front runner to be the Republican presidential nominee. So it doesn't seem as if anything is stopping President Trump from thriving with his businesses.
You know, I'm not a shopper, okay? I rarely go to a grocery store. I'm not going to get into that. But anyhow, I have different people who love Costco. And, you know, when you go to Costco, They tell you whatever you see on the shelf, it sells like hotcakes. You know about the controversy with Bud Light. Costco was one of the biggest places where Bud Light was sold around the country. But what they're noticing now is that you rarely see Bud Light on the shelves at Costco, not because Costco is trying to send a message to Bud Light, because Costco is never political. But when Costco does not have your product on eye level where you can see it, it means that the product is not selling anymore. And if it's not selling, they're removing it. They replace it with something that does sell.
Right. You know, like you, I am not a big grocery shopper, and I'm sorry to say I've never been in Costco, but I think it is very telling that if Costco, out of all stores, are not selling your product, then I think that there is some conversations that need to be had. Perhaps Bud Light is not doing as well as Bud Light thinks that it is. I don't know. That's something that we would have to wait and see.
But the deeper question I'm asking you, it seems as though you look at Target, you look at Bud Light, look at Ben's and Jerry. They said the land was stolen. The United States should give the land back to the Native Americans, and then Native Americans come out this week and say, well, your headquarters are sitting on stolen land. Why don't you start the process by giving your land back? It seems as though that some of these corporations are willing to pay the price to lose billions of dollars by their CEOs, not necessarily their employees who are impacted most by this, because they want to give a political message instead of remaining neutral. They understand the consequences and to boot with everybody else.
Yeah, I agree with that. I definitely agree with that. That's something that I would, I'm not really knowledgeable in that field. So I think that's something that we have to wait and see. I think that this Costco Bud Light relationship, I think it's something that, I would have to learn more about to speak, more freely about.
Okay, let me go to your bailiwick. You're a professor. What are your students saying to you going forward since the Supreme Court gave them a reality check on student loan forgiveness debt? And what do you say to your student in the process? What do you do now?
A lot of my students are very upset about the student loan forgiveness. A lot of them feel that it is unfair, that a lot of them cannot afford to pay for college. A lot of them feel that they got their hopes up and was thinking, even colleagues that are, in their profession now who are still paying on student loans are very upset about that. What I tell them is that there are a lot of grants that are out there. There are a lot of scholarships out there, and to not solely depend on student loans. There are so many different avenues of money. You have churches, you have faith-based communities, you have fraternities and sororities, you have different organizations, you have private investors who give out scholarships. So I don't think that this should, I understand that this can be discouraging, because let's be clear, if you don't pay back your student loans and you get into default, that could affect your credit score. And so a lot of people are upset. A lot of people feel that they got their hopes up. But what I encourage my students is to research, not just go out there on social media, not just about what you've heard, but research on your own terms about there are scholarships out there. There are grants out there, things that you don't have to pay back. So it's all about educating yourself and not to be totally dependent on loans, not to be totally dependent. Because here's what I try to teach my students is to walk out of college and be debt free. And if you can get scholarships out there, and it's all about networking. It's all about, sometimes it's not about what you know, it's who you know. It's about getting in the room, in the right circles with the right people and speaking the right language, and people will help you.
But are federal student loans eligible for forgiveness?
Yeah, it can be.
Can be. Let's talk about, before I say goodbye to you, let's talk about what the real issue is. You've got a lot of these institutions like Harvard and Yale and Stanford and these so-called Ivy League schools. They have billions of dollars in endowment. Why don't they just lower their costs and make it affordable for these kids to go to school? Why?
Come on. I mean, we know that those schools are not going to lower the
If
cost.
they care so much about their students, why won't they make it affordable for them? College is way too expensive, Tiffany. It's out of control.
Mm-hmm. But I think we also have to look at it that colleges have to survive too, you know, especially with private universities. You see a lot of private universities, their costs are higher because that's how they get their funding, is through tuition. But the bigger question that I want to talk about is this affirmative action. Is, you know, is that's one thing about the cost, but let's talk about affirmative action. I have to say this, Armstrong, is that I get so tired of people talking about affirmative action is just giving somebody something. Affirmative action is not giving minorities, particularly African Americans, anything. It's about allowing us to get through the door when we have not had equal opportunities, when we haven't had fair opportunities. Affirmative action gets us through the door, but it does not keep us there. And I have to be honest with you, it's very, very disheartening when we see Supreme Court Justice Clarence Thomas, who has thrived on affirmative action. Everything that he has received has been because of affirmative action.
Wait. I know Justice Thomas. I worked with him when he was at EOC. What makes you think Justice Thomas thrived and benefited from affirmative action? Because I know firsthand that is just not true.
1968, a Holy Cross. He was admitted at Holy Cross because they were looking for African American students. When he got accepted into Yale.
So let me ask you this: why are the white students? Let me ask you this: why are the white students admitted?
Why the white students were admitted?
No. Tell me why white students are admitted at universities and college. Legacy, they get benefits because their parents were there. They get benefits. Everybody gets benefits. Why don't we call that affirmative action? What do you call it?
Okay, so
why do you have to single out Justice Thomas? Everybody gets a leg up somewhere or another. You just call it something different.
Come on.
Oh, come on, please.
No.
Yes, come on.
No.
Oh, please. I tell you what you're doing, you're advocating for white women right now because they've benefited more than anybody else. That's what you're advocating for, because black people haven't benefited. White women. Black people overall have, and the majority of them have benefited from no affirmative action. Come on, Tiffany.
Oh, no. So you mean to tell me that it's okay for Justice Thomas to vote against affirmative action when he admitted that his success has been because of affirmative action?
He has never admitted that. He's never admitted that. You're confusing what the media has manipulated you to believe, but that's not true. But anyhow, listen. I need more time with you. I didn't know you wanted to talk about action.
We need more time. For a man who says that he puts 15 cents on his degree because of affirmative action.
Yeah. Look, you know you my girl, but I got to get you out of here because I got Tyler O'Neill coming up. But anyhow, you and I going to come back and have this conversation. Okay?
Oh, yes.
It's her voice, your future. We'll be back. Don't go away. Speaking of Justice Thomas, guess who was worth around $200,000 when she first became a Supreme Court justice? Sonia Sotomayor. Guess who is now worth at least a few $1 million? Sonia Sotomayor. Guess who made millions of dollars publishing books with Penguin Random House? Sonia Sotomayor. And guess who didn't recuse herself from cases Penguin Random House had before the Supreme Court? Associate Justice Sonia Sotomayor. Guess who didn't report this? ProPublica. You know, the purportedly bipartisan, objective, fact-based media outlet that has targeted Justices Alito, Thomas, Gorsuch in hit pieces that they had no basis in law. If anyone thought they weren't another useless partisan media outlet, this should convince you otherwise. There are clear, obvious questions that should be asked about Justice Sotomayor, especially if she made millions of dollars in book deals from a book publisher with whom had cases before the court. But obviously, ProPublica doesn't want to ask those questions because they would be too inconvenient for their narrative that anybody associated with anybody on the right is a danger to our nation. Tyler O'Neill, your thoughts, and welcome, managing editor of the Daily Signal. This hypocrisy just annoys me.
Yeah, it's really disgusting the way that they go after the members of the Supreme Court who are conservative, who are appointed by Republicans, who are applying the law as they see it. And then, of course, when there's a scandal regarding a left-leaning Democrat-appointed justice, there's suddenly crickets. It's clear what the real end goal of this campaign to delegitimize the court actually is. It's the left making a stink that the court no longer just writes their activism into law.
You know, I've got to talk about President Zelensky from Ukraine, who is an absolutely complete embarrassment in NATO this week. Did you see him standing on stage with those elegantly dressed heads of state, standing there alone, nobody talking to him? He tried to be belligerent with Biden, and Biden tapped down on him, said, look, we're not going to make you a member of NATO and you at war with Russia, because that means all NATO and her allies would have to go to war with Russia. And then you understand what these munition clusters mean? It's also like a declaration of war. And then the British Foreign Secretary said, wait a minute, man, why don't you show some gratitude, some appreciation for what the United States and others continue to do for you? I mean, this actor, this arrogant man, I mean, nothing is enough. He wants more money, he wants more munitions, but he finally got a reality check in NATO this week. Tyler?
Yeah, no, I mean, the idea that NATO would suddenly welcome Ukraine when NATO has Article 5. I mean, Ukraine is being invaded by Russian troops. There's an ongoing war there. If NATO were to grant Ukraine status in NATO, suddenly all of NATO would have to go to war with Russia immediately. So the idea that we would just welcome Ukraine into NATO in the middle of a war is beyond me. And the fact that, look, I understand, you know, President Zelensky is a war leader. He's in the middle of a war. He constantly needs as much help as he can get, but he really should be showing a lot more gratitude to the West, which is not only cut Russia off from so many different economic benefits that they used to enjoy and really ostracize them from the table of nations, but also is sending all of this equipment to Ukraine, and Ukraine just keeps asking for more, for more, for more. It's so funny to see Biden go time after time. He says, oh, well, we support Ukraine, but we're not going to give them X. We support Ukraine, but we're not going to give them Y. And then months later, suddenly he says, oh, we're going to give Ukraine X. We're going to give Ukraine Y. Where is the limiting principle? And why is it that Biden can't keep his word and say, look, we're going this far and no farther?
How do you grade Biden in NATO? I mean, he goes from finally telling Zelensky the truth, but all of a sudden he makes the case for Sweden to come into NATO, knowing the issues that's going on with Erdogan and Turkey, that they must vote on this. How do you grade him?
I think he gets an incomplete. What we've seen from Biden when it comes to Ukraine and NATO, you know, Biden talks a decent game and then suddenly he doesn't fulfill on what he says he's going to do. And then, you know, part of this trip, he decided not to go to a dinner where there were other heads of state. And he's done this repeatedly. And suddenly we're not allowed to ask questions about his age, but he's not up to snuff to go eat dinner with the people that he's going to meet with and discuss the future of a country that's at war right now. You know, he can't take a few hours out of his supposedly busy schedule to go and sit down.
Oh, come on.
You know,
Tyler, that man's old and tired. I mean, you could be flying over there, that jet lag. You're 80-some years old. That man's tired. I get it.
But
If you can't put the best face for America, if you're going to be at that dinner, it's best for him to stay home instead of embarrass himself. What about Christopher Wray's testimony before Congress this week, quickly?
Oh my, yeah. No, I mean, on issue after issue after issue, Wray denied the truth and twisted the facts. We have dead to rights in that judge's opinion that came down on July 4th, evidence that the FBI and other Biden administration agencies had colluded with big tech, had forced big tech to censor Americans. And Wray has the gall to say that the FBI has never been engaged in this crap. And of course, Wray also said that he wasn't responsible when the FBI broke down the door of Mark Hook, you know, a pro-life dad who had just been protesting at an abortion clinic and defended his son after his son had gotten attacked, that, you know, the FBI came in and arrested Mark Hook. And we have an amazing documentary. My colleague, Mary Margaret Olahan, interviewed Mark Hook and his family, and they talked about the way that the FBI went after them. And when Congress pressed Wray on this abuse of power that the FBI engaged in, this politically driven attack on a pro-life American, Wray said he had nothing to do with it.
And you know, and that's what he said during the entire testimony, especially when they asked about Hunter and his intimidating conversation when he had his father sitting next to him. We know exactly what that was. Well, listen, thank you so much, Tyler. Thank everybody else for joining us on this Monday, July 17th edition of Your Voice, Your Future. I'm Armstrong Williams.